Good day everyone, Grudge here with just a little video about the DCS Grudge match series, where I want to introduce and do a short recap of the Grudge match for Luftwaffe vs RAF DCS match from last Saturday, while flying some of the DCS warbirds around a bit in the background. Primarily, I want to introduce the DCS Grudge match series in general a bit more in this video, as well as give a few thoughts on the last match and esports-like tournaments like this in DCS. So let's start with introducing the Grudge match series in general, since I assume not everybody knows about it. Well, the DCS Grudge match is a series of esports-like matches in DCS hosted and broadcasted by DCS YouTuber and streamer Hook, supported by SA Sims Flankerator. Now, the series originated back when the F5 Tiger was about to be released, with the F5 Tiger being somewhat of a counterpart to the MiG-21 we already had in DCS. The idea came up to create the first Grudge match between the two planes and livestream the event. A great way to try out a new plane in DCS, but more than this first match also proved how much fun watching such a match in DCS can be, especially when it is well commentated, and Hook certainly does a great job at this. So the Grudge match series continued and keeps getting more fans, and is also starting to branch out into other settings possible in DCS beyond the original F5 vs MiG-21 only matches, though I am sure there will be more of those as well. The third Grudge match, for example, had the Sub-37 Viggen in it, and the third Grudge match was the first I saw, and as I've already mentioned in the past, I was quite impressed on how entertaining it was to watch. Now, we just had the fourth Grudge match with World War II Luftwaffe vs RAF team this time, and Hook kindly invited me to join him as a co-commentator, which I gladly accepted. I was always a big esports fan, and I watch esports events since many years. It is what got me into watching gaming on YouTube in the first place, and eventually led to doing videos myself. It's really cool to be part of such a broadcast myself for once, and I had a great time. Sadly, since my joining was a bit last minute, I did not have time to make a proper announcement before the match, something I intend to rectify the next time this happens. But the links to the recordings of the matches and Hook's stream are of course in the description, and if you have an interest in air combat and want to see some great World War II fighter or jet fighter flying, I would suggest you check those matches out. Well then, before I give a quick recap of the fourth Grudge match, I would like to talk about the concept of such an esports-like event in DCS in general and give my thoughts on it and its viability. I briefly talked about this already in the previous video, but now I have a few extra insights, having been directly involved with the last Grudge match broadcast. Now, I have to say, I always enjoyed watching a good esports match. I watch matches of traditional esports titles like StarCraft, Counter-Strike and others, for example, since well over a decade, and I think it's just fun seeing some players that really know what they are doing go at it in an action-based match. But with my own interest in more realistic simulations, I always wondered if something like that would work with a flight simulation as well. If a realistic flight sim would be entertaining to watch for viewers, and now, having watched the Grudge match series and having been involved with the last one myself, I can say yes, it is in my opinion. As a matter of fact, I think that such matches in DCS work a lot better and are more fun to watch than I would have ever expected. And I know I'm not the only one who thinks so. Even compared with established esports titles, I think the action more than holds up, and might, on top of being entertaining to watch for people that already play flight simulations, also be able to get more people interested in combat flight simulations as a whole. Now, I think there are two main pillars that a spectator event like this needs to be a success and entertaining. First, it needs to have a reasonably high skill ceiling, so that a good pilot or player has an opportunity to show off his skill and that there is enough room for interesting tactics and skills to develop. And that part a flight simulation like DCS of course has covered. With its very detailed aircraft and weapon systems, there's a lot of room for a pilot to show off his skills in either maneuvering, in tactics, weapon handling, or even things like damage control. The second important part is that it is both entertaining to watch and that what is going on is easy enough to follow even for people that have no prior experience with the subject, so that the audience can grow beyond what it already is. And that second part is where I found that the DCS Grudge matches do surprisingly well. Being a hardcore flight simulation, one would expect you need to know a lot in order to follow what is going on. That is what I assumed before I watched the first Grudge match, but as it turns out after watching it, it is actually quite easy to follow what is going on, even in my opinion, without prior flight simulation experience. I would go as far as to say that when watching the DCS Grudge match for the first time without prior knowledge of flight simulations, it is easier to follow what is going on than when watching a StarCraft match for the first time without prior knowledge of it. And if you think about it, that actually makes sense. Imagine watching soccer or football, depending on where you are from, for example. You can follow that game even if you know nothing about it, at least the basics. The ball needs to land in the goal to get a point. That's easy enough to understand, that you can follow a game even if you watch it for the first time. If you know more about it, even better, then you can appreciate the tactics and plays made even more. And I think with a DCS match that is similar. Even if you don't have previous flight simulation experience, it is obvious enough to understand that if one plane gets behind an opponent, wrecks it with machine gun fire and the opponent is going down in flames, that's a good thing for the attacker, and enjoyable to watch. If you have flight simulation experience as well, you can appreciate the maneuvers like scissors or tactics, energy management and so forth involved in it even more. That's why I think those DCS Grudge match events actually work very well as a spectator event. The basics are easy enough to understand even for new viewers, but it being a fully fledged flight simulation, there is also more than enough depth and skill involved for pilots to show off some real skill and for more advanced viewers to appreciate. Another thing is that with DCS covering everything from World War II to modern jet fighters, there is also enough opportunity to mix things up and keep bringing new matchups, which keeps things fresh. A match could be with modern jets and air-to-air missiles, early jets like the Sabre and the MiG-15, or World War II fighters. And there are even more jets coming in, like the F-14 Tomcat for example, which I can't wait to have in a Top Gun Grudge match. At the moment, the matches of course take place on the old Caucasus map, which isn't looking all too pretty anymore, but the map should get an extensive graphics update in 2.5 on top of the new World War II Normandy map that should be out soon. Anyway, those are my thoughts on the GM series and DCS esports. I'm quite excited about this project Hook has started here, and I think it has potential to grow and maybe bring new players into flight simulators, and more people to play with is always a good thing. Well, let's take a look at the Luftwaffe vs RAF Grudge match 4 specifically, and let me give you a bit of a recap on it, though I would suggest maybe watching the match first if you want to avoid spoilers. Now, the Grudge Match 4 was the first one that departed from the third generation jet fighters theme and instead focused on World War II fighters, 3 Spitfires and 3 P-51 Mustangs for the RAF side and 5 Bf-109s and 1 Focke-Wulf 190 D9 for the Luftwaffe. And the match was hosted on the Burning Skies servers. Eagle Dynamics acted as a sponsor this time. And rules for the match were very straightforward. The RAF base is at Krimsk and the Luftwaffe is based at Krasnodar, and both teams have 18 ground targets, drugs and APCs, some stationary and some moving, defended by anti-aircraft guns. Every kill gets you a point, ground or air, so there are enough potential points for wiping the enemy team 3 times via ground targets. I like having some sort of objectives in the match like those ground targets, since in reality air forces would also have some sort of objective to fulfill, and not just go at each other for the hell of it. This time it was ground targets. Maybe in a later match with the new AI P-17s released, we could also do one with AI air targets to escort instead. Just an idea. We will see how something like that would work out. But in the Grudge Match 4 it's 18 ground targets per team. And it's up to the teams to decide what tactic they think is best, focus on killing ground targets or air targets, an offensive or defensive approach, and of course what weapons to use. Especially the P-51 Mustang has access to a large number of air-to-ground ordnance, bombs as well as 5-inch rockets. However, carrying them slows the planes down and deteriorates the performance in air-to-air combat significantly. So the pilots in this match have chosen to go without external ordnance, with the cannons and 50 caliber machine guns still being quite capable to destroy trucks and lightly armored APCs. That is a good decision in my opinion. Now, at the start of the match we saw both teams go for very different tactics. The Luftwaffe, maybe as one would expect, tried to get a good amount of altitude as they flew towards the objectives, using their Bf-109's great climb rate to get an energy advantage. The RAF team, maybe knowing that at least their Mustangs would not be able to match the initial climb rate, went for the exact opposite approach, staying on the deck and going for a mast attack on the ground targets right away as fast as possible, with only one of their 6 fighters apparently giving some kind of high cover. A high-risk reward move, I would say. It gives the Luftwaffe fighters the initiative and upper hand in air combat. However, there are 3 times as much ground targets than each side has planes in their squadron, so if the RAF can kill enough of the ground units quickly enough, it might pay off for them and put them in the lead. And indeed, in this case it seems to pay off for the RAF. While the Luftwaffe gets in position above their ground units first, they don't see the low-flying RAF fighters below them right away, giving the RAF some time to work on the ground targets, even though they lost one of their Spitfires in the process. At this time, I think the Luftwaffe also might not have quite realized that all the RAF fighters are down low, and maybe were a bit reluctant to go diving after them right away without seeing the non-existing RAF top cover first that could dive on them if they'd go diving after the RAF on the deck. And the RAF wreaked havoc among the German ground units in the meantime. The Mustang's 50 calibers are well suited to take out those kind of targets, and so are the Spitfire's Hispano cannons. And as a result, the RAF managed in a relatively short amount of time to take out all 18 of the German ground units, giving the RAF the point advantage pretty quickly in the match. By then, the Luftwaffe has arrived in force though, and as expected with their energy advantage, manages to win the first air battle of the match with few losses. However, there are only 6 planes per side and 18 ground targets, so the RAF still has the point lead at this point. And that, in my opinion, meant that at this point the RAF was in an advantageous position now. With all the German ground units taken out, the RAF could focus on defending their own units now, which are closer to their own airbase, giving them a shorter way to reinforce after a plane is lost, and therefore often the numerical advantage. The Luftwaffe, on the other hand, knew that they can't make up those 18 points just in the air. They need to kill ground targets too, while at the same time trying to hold on to their lead in air kills. That meant that the Luftwaffe often had to split up 1 or 2 of their planes from the fight in the air to go after ground targets to even the score there. That helped the RAF to close the gap in air kills a bit over time, while at the same time the Luftwaffe slowly managed to whittle the British ground units down as well, and the scores kept getting closer and closer to each other. At one point in the fight it was even, with both sides having 37 points. However, in the end I feel that the RAF did not quite manage to keep the action focused on defending their ground targets, and often got drawn away closer to the German lines, shortening the German reinforcement times and not having quite optimal defenses over their own ground units. So eventually the Luftwaffe managed to even out the ground unit scores and killed 18 ground units of the British as well, with the air kill scores being very close to each other, however favoring the Luftwaffe by just a little bit. Apparently knowing that, the Luftwaffe then pulled back a bit in a defensive position with just a few minutes left in the match to keep that point advantage up, while the RAF had to stay aggressive and follow them to try to get a few more kills, leading to one last huge furball with almost all the planes involved right at the end of the match. In that last huge furball, the RAF managed to get a few more kills, but so did the Luftwaffe, and when the match timer was up, the Luftwaffe had just a 4-point lead over the RAF for a narrow victory. Well, that's just a little bit of a recap of the Grudge match number 4. There was non-stop action in the match and some great flying by all the pilots, and I hope I can continue my involvement with the Grudge match series. Again, links to the full matches are in the description, and maybe I see you in the next one. Till then, I hope it was informative, thanks for watching, and maybe I see you next time.